Hi everyone and welcome to my channel. So today what we'll be doing is the August wrap-up. I normally don't do TBRs, but I will be starting doing them as of now, and I'm quite interested to see how it will go, because usually I just pick a book when I finish another one, and so it's just really a spontaneous of-the-moment decision. So I'm interested to see what it will give if I try to decide in advance what I will be reading that month. So for this month, as I did not have a TBR, well, we will just be diving in, and every single one will be a surprise for you all, I hope. So in total I read 6 books this month. It's not a lot compared to certain other booktubers. However, I'm pretty proud of it. As I might have mentioned in the previous video, I have been coming down on my number of books over the years. So in 2012 I think I reached an all-time high of somewhere in the 70, and then each year they just got lower and lower and lower until last year when I only read 35 books. So I'm trying to up it, the amount of books I read again, and this month is in that regard very much a win for me. So 6 books, I hope I can keep this up for the rest of the year, and then I will actually surpass my goal of 35 books for this year. So as for the 6 books that I read this month, they are quite diverse in terms of genres. So there's some non-fiction in there, there's mostly fantasy in there, and then there's also a somewhat detective genre book in there. My appreciation of them is also a bit diverse. I have one that I rated with a 1 star, which is the worst star I have given this year, I believe. And then I gave one 2-star rating, a 3-star rating, 4 stars. So let's dive in. The first book that I read this month is Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. So as you can maybe tell, I read this book in the Spanish version. So I'm currently rereading the Harry Potters. I'm saying currently, but the time frame of this is not like I read one every month. I read one whenever I feel like it. But so currently I'm rereading them in Spanish. I read them already in Spanish when I was living in Spain for half a year, but I'm now rereading them just to get my Spanish up and going again. I use it a lot in my day-to-day life because I need it for my job, but there it's mostly in written form, and I thought reading a bit more will also help me with getting it in my mind again and maybe being able to speak it more fluently again. So yeah, Harry Potter. The premise, I don't believe it's well known, so I won't dive into it too much, but it's basically about this boy who's living with his uncle and aunt, and they treat him horribly, and then one day he finds out that he is actually a wizard, and that he is pretty famous because when he was 1 year old he somehow defeated the Dark Lord. Yeah, I've really been enjoying rereading them, especially these first 2 ones, because I didn't reread them that much when I was a child. I reread many of the later books a lot, and I reread passages from most all of them, but the first and the second book I feel like they're not as fresh in my mind as the other ones are. So it was very fun to reread them and to come to certain passages and be like, oh yeah, right, this passage. Though there were also certain things that I felt like, oh no, we are at this part that I have to reread now. But overall I've really enjoyed rereading this. I'm definitely also looking forward to rereading the 6th book in that in this series, just because that's my least favorite book, and I'm not sure if I ever actually reread it in its entirety, so it'll be interesting when I get to that. But that being said, that might be a year from now, 2 years from now. I don't know at which pace I will be doing this. So yeah, I don't know which star I gave this, just because it's a reread, and I can no longer objectively judge these books in my opinion. So I would say that it is a 3-star rating in the Harry Potter series, and that's really just saying I love it super much. It would be worth a 4-star rating, but it's not up to the same level to me as the 5th and 7th books, which I would give a 5-star rating, or the 3rd books, which will be a 4-star rating. So that's why I'm going to say 3-star rating, but compared to a lot of other series, it's still definitely a wonderful book, so pick it up. if you haven't already. So the second book I finished this month is a non-fiction book. It is actually partly an autobiography. So it is a book by Stephen King, so it's on writing, a memoir of the craft. So basically this book sets out to kind of help the beginning writer or somebody who's been writing for a while and needs some further inspiration or further tips to kind of discuss how to write books. But that being said, it is also partly an autobiography. So the book is set up in different parts. So for example, you have the first part, which is the CV, and the CV is very much the autobiography part. So Stephen King discusses how his writing career started, and then I'm not necessarily talking about his career, but really how he got into writing, how he developed his craft, how he got rejection slip after rejection slip, but just kept on going. A nice detail there I find is that he would nail all of the rejection slips he got to his wall, and so he had a collection of rejection slips on there to keep him motivated that one day he would get that highly anticipated acceptance. So the second part of the book is called the toolbox, and this really discusses tools that you need as a writer, such as a good knowledge of grammar, vocabulary, style, and he also recommends certain books to help you with this. And then the third and longest part of this book is called On Writing, so the same way as the entire title is called. And this really goes into detail into certain aspects of writing, for example, dialogue writing. It also gives you a challenge, so at some point he challenges you to rewrite a certain story. So he gives a premise of a story and then he asks you to twist that premise and write your own version of it. Sadly, I kind of did it. I started it. I did 3 pages like that, but in the end I did not fully finish this. But so I really enjoyed this book. I felt that it is very inspiring, so it really makes you feel like, okay, I want to sit down, I want to start writing, let's do this. I also thought it gave some very interesting tips on certain things that you need to avoid as a writer. That being said, it is something that is very subjective. Yes, I believe that it raises your writing to a certain level, but I'm not necessarily saying if you do all of these things you will never get published or nobody will read your books, because there are a lot of books that have been very widely read that were not that well written. Whether it is for somebody who is not into writing, I don't think so, but I also don't think that you would be so interested in the premise in the first place, so probably you won't pick it up in that case. There are some autobiographical aspects to it, and so if you're interested in those, read the first part. There is some more in the end as well, so maybe go and look for that. Throughout, the book does not include that many autobiographical elements, so if you're going into this thinking this is an autobiography, in part, okay? I gave this book a 4-star rating because it was so inspirational. I really felt like I was gonna start writing my book right after this. This did not happen, but that is mostly due to my sense of procrastination, which we will talk about later in this video. So yeah, if you're interested in writing and you want a book that can kind of get you going, read this one in combination with a later book. The third book I finished this month, I do not have a physical copy of because I borrowed it from the library and I already returned it. So that's a tip for myself for next time, just keep them with you until you shoot this video. And that is Legion by Brandon Sanderson. Now, I love Brandon Sanderson. Brandon Sanderson is one of my favorite authors. I'm really happy that at some point I picked up the Mistborn trilogy and figured this out. I'm also currently reading his Stormlight Archive series, and I'm also really waiting for the mass market paperback version of Oathbringer to come out, because then it matches my previous books and I can finally start reading this. However, I did not enjoy Legion, and I know that this is somewhat controversial, I guess, because everybody I've seen discuss this book has totally loved it, and I am going to come out straight away and say that this is mostly due to the fact that I don't like detective novels. You have the premise of the book is you have this protagonist called Steven, who has sort of like a split personality. So he sees them as different people in his life who have a speciality in certain fields. So you have somebody who apparently knows how to disable a bomb, who is not very prominent in this book, but he's definitely mentioned. And then you have a sort of person who's like the fashionista, who will be able to spot details about clothing and things like that. You have somebody who's very good at physical combat, and so he can draw on all of these different personas to help him crack a case, for example. He's very reluctant to do so, and so at the beginning of the book he's constantly turning people away who are coming to his house to ask for his help, until this one person shows him a photograph of a person from his past who's been dying to find. And this kind of sets him on a journey to solve the case that this person brings to him. For me it was too much like a detective novel, you know, figuring out why did somebody do whatever he did, what he did, how did he do it, and where is this person now, and trying to find him to bring him to justice. Yeah, I don't like detectives. I don't know why. I just really don't care about the resolution. So for me, the crime would be more interesting. It would be more interesting to see it from the get-go, you know, see the person pull off the crime, than for me to then the other way around, seeing the crime first and then figuring out who did it. So I believe that that is fully the reason why I don't like it. I felt like the writing was bad. I know a lot of people say that the writing was super good, so I think it is also just due to the fact that I don't like that style of story, and so the style automatically leads to a certain way of writing, which I just couldn't appreciate, which is why sadly I gave it a 1 star, because yeah, I really did not like it, sadly. Because yeah, I really did not like it. However, that being said, I'm really looking forward to getting Oathbringer in my mailbox at some point in October. So don't get me wrong, I still love Brandon Sanderson, just not this one. The 4th book that I read this month also came from the library, and so I also returned it. Yeah, lesson learned. And that is Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. So I had not read any of the Robin Hobb books yet, which is a mystery to me why. I know that I've seen them so many times when I was young, when I was really in the top of my fantasy phase. I really saw them there a lot of times, but I never got around to reading them. I was also always thinking like, yeah, I want to get into them, I need to figure out which books to read first. But it never happens, and recently I've been having some difficulties due to having to wait for the new book of Game of Thrones and the new book of Patrick Rothfuss. So I've been kind of reluctant to start fantasy again. But so yeah, that has totally changed for me since reading the 2nd book in the Stormlight Archive series, Words of Radiance. So I'm totally back into fantasy, and that's why I decided to pick up another fantasy series. So when I was going through the library and I found this book, I was like, yeah, now is the time, I really need to start reading this book. So Assassin's Apprentice follows a young boy who is the bastard of one of the princes of the realm. So basically all the princes and kings have like these names that reflect their character, and the prince called Chivalry, who is the heir to the throne, is the father to this bastard boy. It's usually called Fitz throughout the book, but he doesn't really remember his real name, but so I will refer to him as Fitz, as that is the name he's mostly given. And the boy is about 7 or 8 years old. He is dropped off at the footstep of his Uncle Verity's place and introduced there as the bastard of Chivalry. So when this news gets out, Chivalry steps down, so he will no longer be heir to the throne. The new heir is Verity. Verity takes Fitz with him to the capital, where he's left in the care of Burick, the stable master, who used to be the servant to Prince Chivalry. And under Burick's care, Fitz learns a lot about how to treat animals. However, it turns out that he has a sort of affinity to animals. He can really bond with them. And bonding that he does with these animals goes much further than normal bonding. You know, they kind of merge into one. They can move together without having to verbally communicate. So they can move together as if they are one. They feel each other's emotions. And when Burick figures this out, he instantly takes action and removes the dog with which Fitz is bonded the most away from him, because he feels that this skill that he feels that this talent that Fitz has is a forbidden talent. It's a monstrosity. you're not supposed to be able to do this, and so he tries to keep Fitz from using his talent from that day onward. At a certain time in the book, Fitz is noticed by the king, and the king starts using him as a pawn. So he wants to offer Fitz a real education. So Fitz becomes educated in the arts of swordsmanship. He learns how to read and write, which he's particularly good at. But so he's also being trained at night by a mysterious character called Shade, who is an assassin who is teaching him his craft. So the book touches on some very interesting themes and has a very nice plotline. I feel like the ending was a bit rushed, so I really loved the book throughout, and it had a very nice ascension and development. You really see this boy grow up and become more and more independent, but also suffering through some very difficult times. However, the resolution to me came too fast. So I feel like the final 3 or 4 chapters should have been a lot longer. They are really central parts of the book, and to me, they feel rushed. However, that being said, it is the first book in a trilogy, and the first trilogy in a different series of trilogies. So it's not that big of a deal for me at this moment. I will let you know when I finish the series whether I still feel like that should have been expanded upon more. So because of this rushed ending, I gave it a 4-star rating. Otherwise it would have definitely been a 5, and my 4 would probably be a 4.5, more like that. But yeah, the ending really disappointed me, and the ending is really the part of the book that shapes my opinion about it. The 5th book that I finished this month is a non-fiction book. I do not have it in physical form, I read it on my Kindle, and that is The 5-Second Rule by Robbins. So I already talked about it in my previous video because I was still reading it at the time. So quick premise is just, it is an explanation of the 5-second rule, which is a rule that Mel Robbins discovered while she was having difficulties. She was in a depression and she had difficulties getting up in the morning, would constantly she would constantly hit the snooze button. Sounds familiar. And so she discovered one day that if she would just set 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 and got up, that really helped her, and she started using that rule day to day. She started using it in a lot of different areas as well, and she figured out that that was a very good way to motivate yourself or to get yourself going. I will do a full review of the book, so look for that video in the upcoming days, weeks. I'm not entirely sure of its timing. I gave the book 2-star rating, so I didn't really necessarily like it. I think you can just watch the TED Talk that she has on YouTube, and that really brings across the impact of it, brings across how to use it, and it does that all in a much more concise way than the book does. But the book is mostly overly long. It could have really done with some editing, so there are a lot of testimonials in there, which is nice to see the impact it has on people, but it just becomes way too long that way. There should have definitely been less testimonials in it. Also, I don't feel like a lot more was said in the book than was said in that TED Talk. So do yourself a solid and watch the TED Talk, because it might really get you motivated to start doing stuff. And then the final book that I read this month was also already briefly touched upon in my previous video, because I was reading it at the same time, and that is The Rest of Us Just Live Here by Patrick Ness. So as you can maybe tell, I got some post-its in there, so I will also be doing a full review of this book, and then I will definitely read certain passages from the book that I feel like are really worth it. The Rest of Us Just Live Here. The premise of the book is that we follow 4 teenagers at a high school in a small town who are on the brink of having their graduation. In their town there have been certain paranormal, supernatural stuff going on in the past, and during the time of this book this is also happening. But as they constantly refer to the bad things only seem to happen to indie kids, because indie kids always turn out to be the chosen ones who have to save the world. And so at the same time that this book is going on, you get hints of a sort of big supernatural fantasy plot going on. I really like this book. I expected it to go a bit differently than it did, but I'm not holding that against the book. It's very nice to see a book kind of taking you by surprise. So the plot that's going on in the background, so the fantasy story, is very much stereotypical. It's very much, you can predict it throughout. It has a lot of tropes that are very popular in YA fantasy. And in that way I feel it's a bit of a commentary on the fact that those tropes are like omnipresent in fantasy, or YA fantasy at the very least. But the focus is really on the main story. I was expecting there to be a much more overlap, and there is overlap, but the focus is never on that overlap. The focus is always on the lives of these 4 teenagers. And what Patrick Ness does so wonderfully in this book is show how extraordinary the ordinary can be. So we follow these 4 kids who are each dealing with stuff in their own life. So the protagonist, Mike, for example, he suffered from OCD. So he has a mom who's in politics, and she's going out for a new position, so they are very much in the public eye. His sister used to have anorexia, and she actually died for a couple of minutes, and so because of that he's developed an obsessive compulsive disorder. At the time that the book starts, he's actually getting back into OCD patterns. So he was good for a while, but he's starting to realize that he's starting to use these patterns over and over again, probably due to the anxiety of graduating, of leaving his friends and things like that. Then we have another character, Hannah she's called, whose parents, for example, want to move to the Central African Republic and take her with her, so that would mean that she would not see her friends after graduation. I only gave it a 3.5 rating, and I feel that that might be a bit unfair on my side. It is a subjective rating. I think if I were to rate it as a YA fantasy contemporary book, I would give it a top marks, but I just feel like I cannot give it those marks because compared to other books that I've read that I'm giving 4 or 5 stars, this does not reach that level. But as a YA fantasy or YA contemporary, it is definitely a good book. It is very enjoyable. It has some very interesting lessons and some very interesting tropes and very interesting plot lines. So don't let the 3.5 rating stop you from reading this. I definitely liked it. I would recommend it. It's just that I have other books that I appreciate more and that I feel deserve a higher rating than this book. That's it for my reading for August. So I read 6 books. I'm so happy. I hope I will be able to continue this on in September. Next week probably I will be posting not my September TBR but my US trip TBR. So I will be leaving for 3 weeks to the US in September, and that's why I'm just doing a US trip TBR. I'm not sure what I will be reading in the first week of September, but you will eventually see this in my September wrap-up. So I have quite a, for me at the very least, I have quite an ambitious US trip TBR, and I'm very interested to see whether I will actually make it or whether, yeah, I will crash and burn. So that's it for me for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please comment down below what you've been reading. It would be very interesting to see. And if you've read any of these books and you want to contribute your opinion about it, feel free. I would definitely like to see some opinions about people who absolutely love Legion, who totally hate me for only giving The Rest of Us Just Live Here 3.5 stars. Go ahead, comment down below, but keep it civil, but as always, please respect other people's opinions about books. I will also respect yours. Okay, bye!